Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we will discuss the top 10 countries that support Vietnam against China in 2025. The China-Vietnam conflict is largely centered around territorial disputes in the South China Sea and historical tensions from the Vietnam War era. Since the 1979 Sino-Vietnamese War, where China launched a brief but intense military conflict against Vietnam, relations between the two countries have been complex. In recent years, the growing Chinese expansion in the South China Sea, including the militarization of artificial islands, has exacerbated tensions with Vietnam, a nation claiming sovereignty over these territories. But why do certain countries choose to side with Vietnam in this ongoing struggle? Is it about regional security, democratic values, or economic interests? Like, subscribe, and watch till the end to find out why these nations have thrown their support behind Vietnam in its geopolitical standoff with China. Let's dive in. Number 10. Thailand. Thailand's support for Vietnam and its territorial disputes with China is largely motivated by shared regional security concerns and economic interests. As a member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Thailand has long been vocal about the preservation of maritime freedom in the South China Sea, an issue that directly affects its trade routes and regional stability. In 2025, Thailand continues to align with Vietnam on issues related to China's territorial claims and the militarization of the South China Sea. Thailand views China's aggressive expansion in the region as a direct threat to ASEAN unity and regional peace. While Thailand maintains diplomatic relations with China, its support for Vietnam's stance is rooted in the desire to maintain balance and sovereignty within the Indo-Pacific region. Emotionally, Thailand sees Vietnam's independence and resilience against Chinese pressure as a reflection of its own struggle to maintain sovereignty in the face of China's dominance. Vietnam's alignment with ASEAN's objectives in regional security, such as freedom of navigation and territorial integrity, has earned it Thailand's support. Thailand's shared democratic values with Vietnam also play a role in the mutual respect that exists between the two nations. Number 9. South Korea. South Korea's support for Vietnam against China is driven by strategic concerns, economic partnerships, and shared opposition to Chinese expansionism. South Korea views China's growing military presence in the South China Sea and its territorial claims over disputed waters as a threat to freedom of navigation and regional stability. In 2025, South Korea continues to back Vietnam's claims in the South China Sea, particularly as both nations seek to counter China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific region. South Korea's alliance with the U.S., particularly in military defense, aligns it with Vietnam's strategic interests in limiting China's dominance. South Korea also views Vietnam as a valuable partner in regional economic growth and security cooperation. Emotionally, South Korea supports Vietnam's resistance to China's growing military presence in Southeast Asia and militarization of islands in the South China Sea. Both countries face economic threats from China's dominance in the region, and South Korea sees Vietnam's strong stand as a symbol of resilience against China's authoritarian rule. South Korea's growing military ties with Vietnam, especially in counterterrorism and defense cooperation, reflect the shared interests in regional security. Number 8. Japan. Japan's support for Vietnam against China is primarily driven by historical animosities, economic security, and military strategy. Japan has long been critical of China's territorial expansion in the South China Sea due to its maritime security concerns. Japan sees China's aggressive claims over disputed islands and the militarization of the region as a direct threat to its economic interests and freedom of navigation. In 2025, Japan continues to align with Vietnam in its stance on China's encroachments in Southeast Asia. Japan is particularly concerned with China's growing dominance in global shipping lanes, which are vital for Japan's trade routes. Japan's military support for Vietnam's sovereignty includes joint naval exercises and strategic cooperation to counter China's influence. Emotionally, Japan views China's expansionism as a challenge to regional balance and democratic values, contrasting with Japan's commitment to peace and global cooperation. Both Japan and Vietnam share a desire to counter China's rising power, and Japan views Vietnam's resistance as necessary to safeguard regional stability. Japan's active participation in multilateral security dialogues like the Quad, in which Vietnam is an observer, further emphasizes its support for Vietnam's security interests. Number 7. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom's support for Vietnam against China is largely driven by its commitment to international law, human rights, and regional security. As a longtime supporter of freedom of navigation and international arbitration, the UK strongly backs Vietnam's position on the South China Sea dispute. The UK's involvement in the Indo-Pacific region has intensified as it seeks to maintain a global presence post-Brexit, particularly in security cooperation with key allies like India, Australia, and Vietnam. In 2025, the UK continues to support Vietnam's claims to the South China Sea through diplomatic channels and its active involvement in UN discussions. The UK's historical ties to ASEAN and its commitment to maritime security make it a natural ally of Vietnam in opposing China's military buildup in the region. Emotionally, the UK sees China's assertiveness in the South China Sea as a violation of international law and UN conventions, particularly regarding territorial disputes. The UK's support for Vietnam's sovereignty is a reflection of its broader commitment to multilateralism and its efforts to uphold international norms. With China's influence rapidly increasing, the UK views Vietnam's resilience as a vital counterbalance to Chinese dominance in Southeast Asia. Number 6. Germany. Germany's support for Vietnam against China is motivated by regional security concerns, economic interests, and commitment to democratic values. As one of the leading European powers, Germany has been a strong advocate for freedom of navigation and international law, particularly in relation to the South China Sea dispute. In 2025, Germany has continued to support Vietnam's sovereignty in its territorial disputes with China, particularly as it seeks to counter China's growing economic dominance in the Indo-Pacific region. Germany has been an active proponent of multilateral security efforts that include Vietnam as part of a broader strategy to ensure the stability of trade routes in the South China Sea. Emotionally, Germany supports Vietnam's democratic framework and its resistance to authoritarianism, which contrasts sharply with China's centralized communist regime. Germany has also condemned China's human rights violations in regions like Tibet and Xinjiang, which further underscores its support for Vietnam's democratic principles. Germany's role in global economic affairs also makes it wary of China's economic influence and its expansionist strategies. By supporting Vietnam's position, Germany aims to protect regional peace and stability, ensuring that China's economic reach does not disrupt global trade flows and international law. Number 5. Philippines. The Philippines' support for Vietnam against China is driven by shared territorial disputes, regional security concerns, and economic alliances. The Philippines has faced similar territorial challenges in the South China Sea, where China's claims overlap with the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. The 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling, which favored the Philippines in its case against China, has aligned the two nations on the issue of sovereignty in the South China Sea. In 2025, the Philippines continues to support Vietnam in its resistance to China's militarization of disputed islands and expansionist claims in the region. The Philippines sees Vietnam's stance as crucial in ensuring that China does not dominate the region's key trade routes and natural resources. Emotionally, the Philippines views China's behavior as a direct threat to its own sovereignty and economic survival. The Philippines' military cooperation with Vietnam has grown, especially in maritime security operations and joint efforts to counter Chinese maritime expansion. The Philippines shares Vietnam's concern over China's assertiveness, particularly its violations of international law. Economic ties with Vietnam have grown, and the Philippines views Vietnam as a strong ally in pushing back against China's regional dominance. Number 4. United States. The United States' support for Vietnam against China is grounded in shared democratic values, regional stability, and a mutual desire to counter China's growing influence. As a global superpower, the U.S. has a strong commitment to freedom of navigation and the rule of law in the South China Sea, where China's territorial claims and military activities have sparked tension with neighboring nations like Vietnam. In 2025, the U.S.-Vietnam alliance has deepened significantly. The U.S. supports Vietnam's sovereignty and territorial integrity, particularly in the South China Sea dispute, where both countries face Chinese aggression. The U.S. views Vietnam's resilience as critical to maintaining peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region and supports its right to challenge China's illegal maritime claims. Emotionally, the U.S. views Vietnam as a democratic partner in a region where authoritarian regimes like China are becoming increasingly influential. The US-Vietnam defense relationship has grown stronger, with both nations conducting joint military exercises and enhancing intelligence sharing to counter China's increasing militarization of the region. The US also sees Vietnam as an economic partner in countering China's economic dominance in Asia, which aligns with US interests in preserving open markets and ensuring regional trade security. Number 3, Canada. Canada's support for Vietnam against China is driven by its commitment to human rights, regional security, and global stability. Canada, as a strong advocate for international law and multilateral diplomacy, has consistently supported Vietnam's claims to its territorial waters in the South China Sea. In 2025, Canada remains a strong backer of Vietnam's sovereignty in the region, particularly in the context of China's aggressive territorial expansion. Canada shares Vietnam's concerns about China's illegal claims over international waters and its growing military presence in disputed territories. Canada has also been vocal in international forums like the United Nations, where it supports Vietnam's legal rights under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Emotionally, Canada's commitment to democratic values aligns with Vietnam's political system, which contrasts with China's authoritarian rule. Canada's support for Vietnam's resistance is part of its broader strategy to support international peace and order in the face of China's territorial aggression. Canada's growing economic ties with Vietnam, particularly in trade and technology sectors, make Vietnam an important partner in countering China's rise as a global superpower. Number 2, Australia. Australia's support for Vietnam against China is based on shared strategic interests, economic ties, and a commitment to regional security. Australia, as part of the Quad, views China's militarization of the South China Sea as a threat to maritime security and regional peace. Australia's defense relationship with Vietnam has strengthened in recent years, particularly as both countries seek to balance China's growing regional influence. In 2025, Australia continues to align with Vietnam in its stance on South China Sea sovereignty. Both nations oppose China's expansionist policies and seek to preserve freedom of navigation in vital maritime trade routes. Australia's support for Vietnam's sovereignty is also rooted in its desire to prevent China's hegemonic control of Southeast Asia. Emotionally, Australia views Vietnam as a reliable ally in countering China's regional dominance. Australia shares Vietnam's concerns about China's growing military presence in the region and supports Vietnam's efforts to resist Chinese territorial claims. Australia's growing economic relationship with Vietnam, particularly in energy and trade, further deepens the strategic alliance. Australia sees Vietnam's role in Southeast Asia as crucial for maintaining a balanced regional order, ensuring that China's expansionism does not threaten global trade stability. Number 1, France. France's support for Vietnam against China is motivated by regional security concerns, economic interests, and a shared commitment to democratic values. As a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, France has played a key role in addressing China's expansionist policies in the South China Sea, where France maintains maritime interests due to its territorial holdings in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. In 2025, France continues to back Vietnam's sovereignty and territorial claims in the South China Sea, aligning with Vietnam's stance on freedom of navigation and regional security. France also views China's growing militarization in the region as a threat to international law and peaceful coexistence. Emotionally, France supports Vietnam's democratic processes and sees China's authoritarian regime as a threat to the international liberal order. France has consistently spoken out against China's human rights abuses, particularly in Xinjiang and Tibet, and views Vietnam as a key partner in countering authoritarian expansionism. France's involvement in the Indo-Pacific region, as well as its growing defense cooperation with Vietnam, has solidified its strategic partnership with Vietnam. Vietnam's resilience against Chinese aggression further strengthens France's support, making it a natural ally in ensuring peaceful resolution to the South China Sea disputes. These countries' support for Vietnam against China stems from a mix of geopolitical interests, shared democratic values, and strategic security concerns. From military alliances to economic cooperation, these nations stand with Vietnam in its ongoing struggle against Chinese expansion. Like, comment, and subscribe for more insights on global geopolitics. See you next time.